Join us on a journey where we unravel the latest trends, tackle burning questions, and explore innovative strategies that are shaping the future of compensation, all with a cup of coffee in hand.
Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of Comp and Coffee. In this episode, we're going to be bringing you insights from our salary budget survey report that was released on July the 31st. We're going to hear more about that report soon, but I've got two wonderful guests who are going to talk to me about this report and how you, as compensation professionals, might want to use the research from the report. So I am going to be welcoming Amy Stewart, who's been with me many times on the podcast, who's Principal Research and Insights here at Payscale. And then we have Minde Stone, first time on the podcast. Welcome, Minde. And she's our internal reward lead, her official title being Senior Director Rewards, HR Operations and Talent Acquisition. So welcome, both of you. Do you want to briefly introduce yourselves? Amy, I'll get you to start first.
Absolutely. So yes, my name is Amy Stewart. As Ruth mentioned, I manage a lot of the research and reporting functions here at Payscale. SBS is one of our annual reports, and I am excited to talk about the findings today.
Thank you. And Minde.
Awesome. Well, Minde Stone. And as Reed mentioned, I'm the Senior Director over Rewards Operations and then also with our Talent Acquisition Group. Been with Payscale a little over 2 years now and had the pleasure of talking about SBS once already with Amy a couple of weeks ago, which I'll reference here again, I think a little bit further on. But just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, both of you. Okay, so let's start with the report, SBS, or Salary Budget Survey Report, we call it. Tell us a bit about the report, Amy, and what were the headline findings from this year's report?
Yes. So SBS stands for Salary Budget Survey, and this is an annual report that Payscale and previously PayFactors have been doing on an annual basis to help organizations plan their budget for salary pay increases, both in the following year. So we field this survey in the spring and then release it in the summer in time for budget planning. So this year, the fielding ran between April and June of 2024. The questions in the survey are a little bit repetitive, but they ask, what are your planned increases for 2025? What were your current increases, actual increases in 2024? And we do that for merit, COLA, total increases, promotional increases, and structure increases. So it's a very useful breakout because we do also provide segmentation for the US versus Canada, as well as some select countries outside of the US and Canada, breakouts by state and province, company size, and industry. And then in terms of what are the overall findings for this year, what we're seeing is that salary budgets are declining from the height of what they were during the Great Resignation. Only 19% of our respondents in the US said that their salary budgets are going to be higher in 2025 compared to 2024. You can compare that to 50% that said the same thing at the height of the Great Resignation in 2021. 66% are saying our budgets are about the same heading into the next year. And I think around 13% are saying that they are going to be lower. Overall, we're seeing pay increases decline, not by a lot, but by a little bit. So in the US, they said that their pay increase budget was 3.6% for 2024, and it's dropping to 3.5% in 2025 for the US. And in Canada, it's similar, a little bit lower numbers overall, 3.4% for 2024, dropping to 3.3% in 2025 for Canada.
Right, so similar trends in both countries.
Correct.
Why do you think, obviously we spend a lot of time, Amy, looking at what's going on in the labour markets. Can you explain for the audience why you think pay increase budgets are declining and why we're seeing that drop in 2025?
Absolutely. And I don't think that this will come as a big surprise to compensation budget managers, but there is a lot that ties into the macroeconomic landscape when it comes to budget planning. So what we are reacting to is a cooling labor market. We had the Great Resignation in 2021 and 2022. We also had very high inflation in 2021 and 2022. And both of those things are in decline. So you still hear about inflation being a problem because prices increased and have not come down. But in terms of the growth year over year, we are back down to below 3%, which is a much more manageable place to be. Because what we don't want is to have that wage growth inflation spiral where everything keeps becoming more expensive, like a runaway train. So we are starting to level back to what was normal prior to COVID-19. 3.5% is still elevated. If you look at, the Great Recession time period up from then through COVID, around 3% was the average. So we're still a little bit high to account for those prices being increased, but it is dropping to something that is more within the realm of normal, quote unquote, for
Yeah.
the HR industry.
Now, there's been a lot of speculation in terms of, which way is the economy going to go? Are we going to hit a recession? Are we going to have a soft landing? We obviously, cooling labor markets are what are driving those potential reductions in pay budgets for next year. But are there any indicators that the market is turning around?
Absolutely. I wish I could say, with a 100% certainty that we're going to enter a growth market and we're all going to be, having a bonanza time in 2025, but it is still difficult to say that. Interest rates are still relatively high, relatively, compared to what they were prior to COVID-19. There has been discussion that because the labor market has cooled and that reports over the last half a year were maybe perhaps inflated from what the labor market was actually experiencing, that we are poised for interest rate cuts in September. But I don't speak for the Fed, and I can't tell you what the cuts are going to be, when they're going to happen, if there's going to be deep cuts or shallow cuts, and how often those cuts will happen. And even if we do have interest rate cuts, what that will ultimately impact in terms of the labor market and our potential to start growing again from a hiring perspective. I am cautiously optimistic that we are going to see a positive impact. I do think that the labor market has been sluggish. That was by design to avoid a recession. That's part of that soft landing equation that we've been trying to orchestrate as a country. But it does put businesses in a precarious position of wondering, are we going to teeter too far into the direction of non-solvent and then end up having to have a market correction or a recession in order to get back on pace. So far, that has not happened, but economists are always split on this. So we really don't know until it happens. And we look back and say, okay, there was a recession. Hopefully, we're going to see the opposite happen, that rates will be cut, that things will become less expensive to invest in, and we will start seeing more of a growth economy in 2025.
Oh, to have a crystal ball, hey? So
Yeah.
I think we're all, hanging out there for that growth economy. So, Mindy, in terms of that declining budget, cooling labor markets, is that something that you're hearing and what we're experiencing here at Payscale?
Yeah. So I was just going to use the crystal ball analogy myself. And especially as Amy was talking, I was thinking, this is where, we all get to this part of the year. We're all getting ready to sort of embark on that budget season, if you will, and using such things as the salary budget survey results to help kind of guide our decisions. And it still causes confusion. It still makes people sort of stop to think whether or not they should have multiple versions of a budget going into one meeting, and then should I have a backup, or how many times are we willing to sort of like pivot and turn and make changes along the way. So again, fortunately, I had the pleasure of already accompanying Amy on a webinar a few weeks ago where she obviously broke down some of those same stats about SBS and those results, and really was able to give some of our listeners some insights on how to prepare for their upcoming compensation budget planning season. And we had quite a few comments come in from the participants asking how they should be prioritizing their budgets, knowing that there's likely areas in their orgs with higher turnover, specific recruitment challenges. It's just becoming extra tough right now to spread what seems like even a smaller amount sort of appropriately across everyone? And then how can you truly look out, and this is for everyone, a full 12 months and know exactly where we should be putting our money? So I think it's tough every year. It gets tougher, especially when you start to think about some of these things that are just still so much part of an unknown, and in an election year here in the United States. So,
Yeah. And I mean, essentially, this is a trend report,
yeah.
and it's due, it's kind of to give an indicator at this stage. And obviously, what you end up setting as your budget will be dependent on how your firm is performing, but it will also potentially depend on the industry that you're in, because there are differences in the industries, and we saw that in the survey data. So are there any that are trending higher or lower than those average figures that you were quoting, Amy?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. We do see differences by industry and not just in SBS. We have conferences coming up. I hope everyone listening is registered for conference. We have a lot of healthcare organizations that submitted to speak as conference speakers this year. And I think that ties into the labor market that the healthcare industry is experiencing, which is radically different than the labor market that, say, the technology industry is experiencing right now. In technology, and I'm sure Minde, you could speak to this. Every job application or that every job posting that goes out is getting thousands of submissions, whereas in healthcare, people are struggling to hire nurses, hire case managers, hire lab technicians. So that necessitates a very different strategy when it comes to compensation. And of course, because of the macroeconomic factors, every industry is under the gun to try to reduce reduce inflationary pressures, reduce costs, so that can create even more challenges for that industry. We also saw some higher pay increases in government because of the federal employee mandate that was issued by the current administration, and we also see nonprofits showing higher pay increase plans than some other industries in their report. But you can see a breakdown of all of the industry groupings if you
Mm.
download it and then take a look.
Yeah, and we'll include the link in the episode brief, but you can also find that at payscale.com underneath research and insights, and you'll find the salary budget survey there. And as Amy said, there are pages for each country on the industry averages as well, so that can help you get more specific in terms of the data that you need to start planning budgets. I kind of find it hard to believe, Minde, we were actually talking about planning budgets. You and I were talking before we started the podcast. It is the end of summer, nearly Labor Day. As we record this, it's Labor Day coming up. I've just come back from my PTO. So how should folks be using this data now? Are we ready to start thinking about budgeting season? How does that work?
Yeah, the time is now. And of course, if you didn't get a chance to listen to the webinar I've referenced already a couple times, I would definitely search that one up. Build Your Best Compensation Budget was the name of that one. I think there were a lot of great tidbits, a lot of just nuggets in there about what Amy was sharing, the commentary about the budget survey, sort of like a start and stop. You could reference that, and I think that would be helpful. At Payscale, we're just around the corner from our own budget planning season for 2025. And we absolutely, of course, use this information along with insights from our hiring managers, our HR business partners, and our recruiters. And I mentioned that in the webinar too, that they become important stakeholders in the entire process here as well, because they've been getting that information along the way. And one of the things that you just mentioned, just from a recruitment standpoint, so some of our recruiters are also weighing into what we know, because we just posted a position to work on my team, and we got 1,100 applicants in 2 days. And right, that's a lot, and it's really just it's even hard for me to understand where to even start sometimes when you think about what we're recruiting for and what we need longer term. So again, a lot can be said about the number of applicants that you get when you post a job. So even the rule of supply and demand comes in and plays a part in all of this as well. So I think it's helpful to know that we're doing the exact same thing that the rest of you are doing as well, and we're just in the beginning stages. But again, it's now, and unfortunately, you're right.
Mhm.
This is the end of summer.
And so will you be using the salary budget survey data?
We do. We absolutely do. And a lot of that, again, is about just making projections on what we think is going to happen. But we also know that there's a lot of good data and a lot of people provide that information. So why not use it? But we absolutely use it here at Payscale. And
Mhm.
we're just wrapping up our mid-year cycle. So we'll be turning right around here in the next couple of weeks and talking more about budget.
Yeah, great. And Amy, we're not the only ones that do this type of survey, are we? There are a few other providers out there. Can you maybe allude to some of those?
Yes, there are other providers that run a salary budget survey. I know Willis Towers Watson runs one, Gallagher runs one. There are some other organizations that certainly ask those same questions and provide that data to their survey participants. And we asked this question again in our own survey compensation best practices report that runs in the fall. Now it's a little bit too late for your budget planning purposes, but it's a good check to see how well you did compared to your peers when that data is released in February. And overall, we're seeing the same trends across those different surveys. The numbers are not one-to-one because the participants, like the size of the companies and where they're located, does differ, but we are seeing a correlation between budgets going down slightly compared to last year. So that is the same across those different providers.
Yeah, and our friends at World of Work do a good job of reporting on that. I know they were reporting on our data, and they report on other providers' data, and they do some good commentary. So if you want to also, find some other resources, do check World at Work. You can find some good information there for this. So Minde, any budget tips for people then, as for this year? Is there anything that you're going to do differently this year in light of maybe the economic climate or changes in our business?
Well, I think just breaking it down into some categories here. If you think about what are some of the things that you should be thinking about now, even before you officially maybe get started or put pen to paper here. I think you're thinking about what things we've already talked about, like business impact, for example. Are there changes that you want to make to your comp strategy or to your philosophy, or does the current plan work for now? And what outcomes does the company need in the end? So again, pulling in those necessary conversations now are really helpful. But don't be afraid to make changes to those strategies and those philosophies as things change. Making sure that you've got the right stakeholders, the people in place. I mentioned our hiring managers, our recruiters. I think I failed to mention our finance partners as part of that. Just making sure that they're, of course, brought into the conversations. What's your role versus what's my role? What information do you want from me versus what are you going to provide for us? And so it's probably a bit of back and forth for anyone in this process. But again, just sort of setting the stage early about what the expectations are, who's taking what scope. And then generally speaking, what's the scope of the plan and the budget for your own business? I know you can't do everything every year. We try to bite off more than we can, and we always go in with a bigger budget than we probably should, knowing that we're probably going to be asked to scale that back. But I think just knowing that you've got your top priorities all the way down to your bottom priorities, and however many that is for you will depend on your business. But I think it's important to list as much as you possibly can. And then, of course, the timing makes a big difference. Everybody's companies are set up a little bit differently. So if your fiscal year, of course, is at the beginning of January or coming up into 2025, you're absolutely going to be getting ready for your budget season now. But that can be adjusted, and some of the information that we share now can be changed depending on, again, what the timing of your own budget season is. And then just from an external standpoint, again, we've already talked about competition for talent, but that will continue throughout the year. So just again, figuring out, what are your competitors doing? What would stand you apart from them? And I always tell people too, I don't think it's just about your compensation budget, although that's what we're talking about today, but maybe your whole your rewards budget as a whole. Again, where are the trade-offs? Because where we might want to put more money on the compensation side, we may need to pull that back from another area. So those are some of my tips, I guess.
Great. Well, they all sound very useful. And as you said, that was all covered in a webinar that you both did. So we'll make sure if I haven't said that already, we'll make sure we'll include the link to that so they can access those resources. And I think you had some slides that accompanied that as well. Interestingly, you mentioned the timing there, because obviously if you are a fiscal year, as you said, this is the time when you start your budget planning. We also cover this in our end of year report, our compensation best practice report. Amy, do you want to just talk about that and the timing of that? Because how we update that data then?
So I mentioned it briefly, but I can go into it a little bit more detail. So we will be fielding that survey in Q4. So again, it's past the time, most likely, that you have at least started your budget. Maybe you are going through a review process after getting your salary data back from whatever surveys you might be participating in from third parties. But we field that survey in the last quarter of the year. We gather the data in January, and we release the report. It was 100 pages last year, around the end of February, early March. So that tends to be a very powerful report. It's not just on salary budgets, but it's on a host of questions that are really impactful and relevant to the compensation space and the HR space. And we'll be teeing up what kinds of questions we're going to be adding for 2025 and then removing from 2024. So if you'd like to send us your ideas, we're certainly open to hearing what they are right now as we build and finalize the survey for that fielding period.
Yep. So stay tuned for that, because if you're needing a more validation in terms of backup on budget trends, and that's another update that will be released. When do we normally release it? January? CBPR?
Oh, no, not January. We get the data
February.
in January, but
Right.
it takes a long time to put together the 100-page report. So it's Q1, but it can be as late as March.
Right. Great. Well, thank you both for sharing your insights today. Thank you, Minde. Good luck with your budget planning. I'm sure we'll get you back again to tell you how things played out and give some more guidance to our listeners. And Amy, thank you as always for coming to share the research data and keep us up to date on the ongoing research that we're producing here at Payscale. And you also did a great call out for conference. Yes, so that's our virtual conference happening on
September 17th, 18th, and 19th. It's virtual. It's free except for the workshops, which are amazing this year. They're divided by strategy, execution, and communication. So you can get detailed guidance on how to use our products specifically to build a comp plan, build your structures if that's where you're currently sitting in an organization. We're going to go into some deep detail on how to do reporting, including things like budget analysis and how to leverage what's in the tool to help get consolidation from your finance team and your executive leadership team. And then also on communications, how do you communicate this in terms of compliance with pay transparency, and how also do you extend that across the organization to all of your employees throughout the employee life cycle. So a lot of really fantastic content for conference this year. If you've not registered, please do that. The free sessions are virtual and free to register, and the workshops are very affordable. So we're looking forward to that in September.
And that's payscale.com events
/conference.
You can get to the conference registration page. So yeah, please register for that. It's fast approaching. I'm going to be delivering a few sessions, and I know we're going to be hard at work over the next couple of weeks preparing for those. So yeah, thank you both for sharing your insights. And our next episode is actually our 100th episode of the podcast. I think it's been running for about 3 years, but we're going to take a little, actually longer than that. The podcast's been running since 2018. I'm looking at my notes here. So it was a podcast that started with Pay Factors when Pay Factors became part of Payscale. We've continued that on, and we have reached the grand milestone of 100 episodes that we've produced here. So we're going to be doing a little look back at some of the topics that we've covered since we began the podcast. I'm going to get a few guests together to come and join me with some coffee and some general discussion about compensation. So I hope you enjoyed today's session. Thank you, Minde. Thank you, Amy, again. Let us know what you think at coffee@payscale.com. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Thank you.